Alrighty, so let us see how far we get moving on from book 6. So chapter 6. Here it is. We can, I think, go through this one quick. The point is rather simple. What are the legal judgments of men concerning other men? No matter how much peace, it's going to be a big word coming up, abides in cities, they cannot be eliminated. How wretched, how sad we think they are. Those judging are unable to discern the consciences of those who they judge. And then if we go down to kind of finish that up, in this darkness of the social life, will a judge who is wise sit in judgment or not? Certainly he will. For human society, which he considers it a crime to desert, binds him and drags him to this duty. Lastly, this great number and magnitude of evils he does not consider to be sins, for a wise judge does not do them because of a will to harm, but because of the necessity imposed on not knowing, and also because of the necessity of judging imposed by human society. Okay, so what he's saying in 6, he's talking about judges, and the deal is, if you recall from Aristotle, he talks about prudence. So does Epictetus, as one of the most important virtues, right? And prudence basically is the ability to judge. So in other words, a good person, right? A virtuous person will always be a good judge. And to Aristotle, a good judge was, I'm not going to say that, a flourishing person, right? So one who was happy, remember? Because we have good judgment, and so we are prudent. Now, what Augustine is saying in chapter 6, though, is that judges, and we didn't get into all the details, have to sometimes do bad things. Have to do, quote-unquote, bad things to people. Now, in his example, if you read it over, he was talking about torture and all this kind of stuff, which we don't do anymore. But it used to be common to torture even innocent people. And so what he's saying in chapter 6 is you have to do all these terrible things and you don't ultimately know the conscience of the person, right? So judges make mistakes sometimes and you really don't know the truth. So very often judges are forced to do things that they don't want to do in the name of keeping the peace. And so if we really pay attention, are judges happy? And the answer he's going to say is no. Okay. And he's setting up the scene for ultimately the importance of this concept, peace. In chapter 7, we get, I'm just going to go ahead and go ahead to chapter 7. He talks about these different worlds. And so if you check out, let's just quickly go there, although you know the deal, I am sure. Here, chapter 7, he starts talking about, right in here, these different worlds. That's what we're going to talk about here in a second. So, we got these different worlds. They are, well, the world, in other words, the international. Then the city, which, if we're making comparisons, we could say nation today. And then literally our homes, the household. Okay, now what he says is, after the city or municipality comes the world, which they regard as the third level of human society. Beginning with the household, let's switch colors here, right? So here we start here. They progress to the city, and then to the world, like converging waters. As the world is larger, so it's more dangerous, right? So here's the household. Here's the city, and here's the world, right? And where he's going with this is, as he'll say as we move forward, whoopsie daisy, I did not mean to do that. Hang on. the deal is, up here, we get lots of what are called social wars. He says, because people don't like hanging out with other peoples. And so we get, different, different tribes, different ethnicities and stuff that tend not to get along. And so because of this kind of social wars is what he's talking about, we get on the world level, we get the imperial city. In other words, the empire. And he's specifically talking about Rome here. And the thing is, what creates peace on this level, sort of, in quotation marks, if you've ever heard of like Pax Romana. In other words, the Roman peace. Pax is peace. Romana is of Rome. The peace of Rome. So the thing is, what empires do is they sort of curtail all these little wars, because what they impose on people is one language. So at the beginning of chapter 7, what Augustine is arguing is that because we don't all share the same language, there's a lot of wars, a lot of conflicts. Because we would rather be, as he says, with dogs rather than with someone who doesn't speak our language. So what happens in the international system is that there becomes a dominant empire, which in his day was Rome. You could argue throughout history, it could have been the Greeks, and then they fell apart, and then the Romans, and then, moving into European and medieval, you got the French, you got the British, and then us, right? And what they always do is they bring one language. Obviously, in his day, it was Latin, right? So you have the lingua franca, it's called. It's the one language. And then you get a sense of sort of peace, until that sort of international peace eventually becomes civil war. And so the thing is, while we hope, and he's going to return to this in a while, you hope that there's a connection between this and this and this. That's the shtick. However, what he's trying to get at is, we try to create peace with empires, right? We try to create peace by bringing justice. And the thing is, every time we bring justice, you have to harm people. That's all there is to it. And, in order to have some amount of harmony, you have to quash resistance. So what kind of peace is that? This is what Augustine is trying to get us to see. And he talks about the just war, right, in chapter 7. But let us jump ahead to chapter 11, folks. Let me just clear my board here. We're going to jump ahead to chapter 11, where we're going to talk a little bit more about peace. And so if you notice, the theme came up in chapter 6, right, where he was talking about peace and judge and all that kind of stuff. Keep in mind that element of judge, because in a way the empire becomes a judge, so to speak, right? With the idea being that we're always trying to find peace. Okay, let's go back to the reading here for a second. And in chapter 11, he says, because the name peace is also frequently used with respect to things which are not subject to death, there certainly is no eternal life. Where there is no eternal life, we prefer to call the end of this city, where its highest good is will, to be eternal life rather than peace. Peace is such a great good, whoopsie-daisy, is such a great good that even with respect to earthly and mortal things, nothing is heard with greater pleasure, right? So in other words, what he's saying here, and we're going to skip here to 13 in a sec, I think, or the end of 12, that is. So in other words, peace, the significance of peace, even when, okay, so if we go back to those three cities, right, and the two cities of God, the earthly and the heavenly, each of them is looking for peace. But as we'll see, in the earthly city, peace is at a cost. The irony is it takes war to make peace. Hence, it's not really peace. So if we look, for instance, on page, skip ahead there to 451, he says, after all, even the evil wage war for the sake of the peace of their own associates. And they would want to make everyone their own if they could, so that everyone and everything would be enslaved to one individual, etc., etc. So the only way to attain peace on earth is to subdue everybody. And the only real peace is you and your buddies. You can't be friends with everybody on the planet, right? And so when you subdue others, it's for the peace of your clique, not for everybody. And if we skip down a little bit, he says, this is just like if someone were to hang with his head downward, the position of his body and order of the limbs would certainly be distorted, because the nature demands to be above what is below, and it wants to be below what is above. This distortion disturbs the peace of the flesh, etc., etc. What is he talking about? So at the very end, when he starts talking about peace, however, it's necessary that even what is distorted be at peace in some way with a part of the things in which it exists, or from which it is established. Otherwise, it would not exist at all. Okay, this is what he's talking about. So we're talking about peace, and peace is to be ordered ultimately. To be ordered how? In respect of the thing you're in. Keep in mind at this point the order of orders, the great chain of being. And he's talking about the human body, right? So the human body has a head, right? Has limbs, has legs, etc. And it's meant to go this way, right? Now, it is possible that you could hang down and walk on your legs. But this would be unnatural, right? And even if you could do it for a little while, eventually, here, I'm just trying to, you get the point, right? Eventually, because you're distorted, you are unnatural. You're not going to be at peace. In fact, it's going to cause a great deal of pain. And so, back to what he was saying, is that, so when we're talking about peace, we've got to we have to understand that in the same way that the human body needs to roll with the way it was naturally put together. So with peace, in order to attain it, we have to make sure that our societies are naturally put together, naturally ordered. So check out chapter 13. Chapter 13, he says, thus the peace of the body is the ordered proportion of its parts. The peace of the irrational soul is the ordered repose of the appetites. The peace of the rational soul is the ordered agreement of knowledge and action. The peace of the body and soul is the ordered life and well-being of a living thing. The peace between a mortal man and God is an ordered obedience in faith under the eternal law. Okay, let's go and draw that out. Okay, so what I've done here is to put together that little part at the beginning of chapter 13 we just looked at. So notice there's sort of we're talking about peace here, first of all. In order to achieve peace, it's like an ascension, right? We're moving upwards sort of thing. So the peace of the body is an ordered proportion of the parts. So in other words, don't walk on your hands, right? You use your body for what it's for and how it's meant to be. Now, he has the rational soul here, irrational soul, and rational soul. All that means is it goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle talked about the soul as what gives life to the body, right? And he spoke of the irrational soul as the lower level sort of animal things about your appetites and stuff like that. And the rational would be higher order things about, mathematics, logic, knowledge, that sort of thing. So that's all he means. So when he thinks irrational soul, think emotions and appetites, that kind of thing. So the peace of the irrational soul is ordered repose of the appetites. What that means is, to repose means to relax, right? So in other words, our emotional and appetitive selves will be squared away when we have our appetites under control, when they are not like constantly forcing us to do things, right? So if I'm sitting here, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, jumping up and down like a kid, then I'm not peaceful, right? Because I'm always wanting something. The rational soul, so in other words, our minds will be squared away and peaceful when we are ordered in the agreement between knowledge and action, right? So in other words, if I do what I know, then I'm going to be squared away. In other words, what it's kind of telling us to do is hold off on doing things until you know for sure, right? So don't fly off the handle and be impulsive. Make sure that you decide well and based on knowledge before you act. And again, that will put our minds at ease. Moving up the chain. So notice this is body, this is low-level soul, high-level soul, and this is the human individual, which is a body and a soul, right? How do you get the peace of the person? An ordered life. Which, by the way, the ordered life is doing all of these things. And now we're at the final one, number 5. Peace between man and God. Now remember, this is theistic, so he believes in God without doubt, right? And now think order of orders. So we are squared away in the universe, in the eyes of God, when we are ordered by obedience to the eternal law. Aquinas, our next guy, is going to talk a lot about eternal law. So it's a good idea to kind of stick that in the back of your mind for a bit. But the idea is, remember that God created the universe, God set everything up. Therefore, he organized the inn that we are in, right? So our our deal is to be ordered to the system he created, and here's how to do it. Because remember, there's God, there's man, there's animal, there's plant. Remember that whole order of orders thing? In a way, what we're doing is we are ordering ourselves here upwards as we would here toward God. And this is how you do it. And in each area, it's like we order ourselves with the next highest level. And obviously, at the end of the day, the highest level is God. So the more we contemplate God, the more all this other stuff down here will get squared away and will become, as he says, orderly. And with that order comes peace. Check out, let's go back to the reading for a second. Where is it? Here we go. Where he says here, therefore, God, who founded all natures most wisely and ordered them most justly, who established the mortal human race as the greatest embellishment of the earth, gave to mankind certain goods suitable for his life. These goods include a temporal peace, proportional to the short span of a mortal life, a peace involving health, preservation, and the society of one's own kind. They also include the things necessary for guarding or recovering this peace, such as what is appropriately fitting at the present to the senses, light, sound, breathable air, drinking water, etc. All this was given through the most equitable stipulation that he who uses such mortal goods rightly, adapting them to the peace of mortals, would receive more and better goods, namely, the peace of immortality and glory in honor suitable to it, in an eternal life, which is for enjoying God and one's neighbor. Okay, check it out. So I'm going to need another color here. So at the end of the day, God gave us, let's just call it resources, right? The things that we need in order to establish an earthly peace. So we have enough resources for an earthly peace, right? So in other words, we've got enough food and all that kind of stuff. And as long as you use these things rightly, then we will be squared away and we will move to happiness, because we'll have enough in order to move us toward what is the true happiness, which is this one, right? So in other words, while we are on this earth and we are using the temporal things to keep our bodies alive, we always have to keep in mind that we use things rightly. We don't be greedy. We don't be lustful. We don't covet things, right? We use them rightly, because the deal is not to have earthly happiness, but to have immortal happiness, as he says, in the glory and the glory and honor of eternal life. So God has given us the stuff we need to keep us squared away. And as long as we do that rightly and we don't lose our minds, then we're going to be squared away for the real peace, which is heaven. So remember, God's peace is the one we want, not the earthly.